It is March 22nd, and we haven't done an NFL mock draft yet. It's a little strange. I mean, you guys know we're fantasy guys. We don't actually cover the NFL draft, so we barely know anything about, or at least I barely know anything about the non-offensive fantasy position players in the NFL draft. But we figured we'd tackle a first-round NFL mock draft. I'm sure a lot of, new viewers that don't usually follow our content will be brought to the channel from that. I encourage you to do exactly what you usually do and go hit the dislike button the second we make a pick that your team would never make in the million years. But, we make fantasy content over here, so don't get too mad at us. But before we get into it, Danny, how you doing?
Yeah, doing well, doing well. We're just trying to have some fun out here, NFL mock. Obviously, we're going to know more of the fantasy guys, but if we, project you guys to take an interior defensive lineman and you wanted a linebacker, like we're not Daniel Jeremiah out here is basically the premise of this video. We're just having some fun, spinning some ball.
Yeah, awesome. So let's hit the intro and then we'll get right into it. All right, so we are now into the draft. I will be picking for the odd teams. Danny will be picking for the even teams. If we end up doing any trades, we'll kind of just, skip over us talking about it, and then we'll actually get into the trade details itself. Carolina is on the clock. Now, we know that they traded away a boatload of picks to come up and get this pick to get themselves a franchise quarterback from the Chicago Bears. The betting odds are about minus 150, minus 200, depending on the sports book, for it to be CJ Stroud, who I think is a perfect fit for the Frank Reich offense and would be the pick that Carolina ends up making. There was some, buzz yesterday on Twitter because Thomas Davis on NFL Network said that they're very tantalized by Anthony Richardson's upside. I don't buy it. I think CJ Stroud's their dude. They want an accurate quarterback, and Anthony Richardson is absolutely not that, and CJ Stroud is. So give me CJ Stroud, quarterback from Ohio State, going to the Carolina Panthers with the first overall pick. Now they got a lot of work to do to build around the guy.
For sure. And those wondering, this is going to be more of a predictive mock. A lot of the buzz that we're hearing is going to be CJ Stroud, even though we personally would take Bryce Young. And yeah, like you said, Thomas Davis, floating around the rumors about Anthony Richardson. You'll hear some rumors about Bryce Young as well. But ultimately, what we do know is that Josh McCown worked for Underdog, hyped up CJ Stroud, really likened his game to a guy like Joe Burrow. We know Frank Reich likes taller stature type of quarterback. So it just, reading the tea leaves, feels like a guy like CJ Stroud would fit what they want.
Yeah, exactly. So, like you said, we would take Bryce Young first overall. I'm assuming you're going to take him here.
Yeah, absolutely. We both believe that this is the best quarterback in the class, natural playmaker. It's kind of funny that the Texans end up with him because his best comparable would be, Deshaun Watson-esque. So getting him in here, replace that young franchise quarterback, rookie deal, I think that's the pick.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this Arizona pick, will be a pivot point for a lot of the NFL draft mockers and stuff like that. I personally don't think that there's a team that's going to trade up for a quarterback ahead of Indianapolis. I think, when you look at Detroit, Las Vegas, Atlanta, they got some like contingency plans, maybe Seattle as well, in place to the point that I think they're comfortable waiting at quarterback. If a quarterback were to fall to them, maybe they would pull the trigger, but I don't think they're going to be hyper aggressive and go up and get a guy. Otherwise, I don't think Atlanta signs Taylor Heineke. I don't think, Las Vegas signs Jimmy Garoppolo. I don't think Jared Goff, is still in place there. So I think Arizona will have to stick and pick here, and they'll probably go with, in my opinion, in a lot of people's opinions, I think the best edge rusher in the class, which is Will Anderson. Jalen Carter's got some legal stuff that I don't think will affect his draft stock too much, but it might be a tiebreaker, at least for Arizona here at 3.
Yeah, I agree with that. You hear some rumblings in the Arizona camp that maybe they shock and, take a guy like Tyree Wilson here. But from what we know now, it seems like, a relative 50-50 type of decision at most for Wilson. And just from what we know, Will Anderson has been dominating Alabama the last couple of years. There was buzz last year when the Hutchinson Trayvon Walker class was out that if he was eligible, he would have been the first overall pick. I just think Arizona, you stick and pick, you take a guy that can absolutely remake your defense with Will Anderson, especially not to mention with Gannon coming over, he can play that pseudo, Hassan Reddick type of role for this team.
Yeah, that would make a lot of sense from a scheme fit perspective. So we're probably going to hear a quarterback's name come off the board. Yeah. Which quarterback are you going with?
Yeah, so this is an interesting point. It's, a relative 50-50 as to where Indianapolis would lean. And because it's a 50-50, I'll just go with the guy that I like here with Anthony Richardson. Anthony Richardson, I just think is a great fit for what they're trying to do there. Shane Steichen coming in to really, transcend that offense. Get a guy like Anthony Richardson to be able to play that pseudo Jalen Hurts-like role.
Yeah, I mean, he turned Jalen Hurts, who was not a complete prospect coming out of Alabama and Oklahoma, and he turned him into an MVP candidate and probably
Yeah.
would have won the MVP had he not gone down towards the end of the year. Now, I do think it's a legitimate possibility that the Seattle Seahawks would take Anthony Richardson at 5th overall if he was on the board, because Geno Smith's contract that he just signed is mostly front loaded. Most of the guarantees are in the first year. So, I mean, for a guy like Richardson who needs to sit and probably wait a year before he can actually end up playing, I think he would make a ton of sense, to be honest, for a team like Seattle. But I do think, like you said there, and like we kind of just made the pick for, Anthony Richardson probably goes 4th overall to the Indianapolis Colts, assuming that the other top 2 quarterbacks are off the board.
Yeah, and quick preface there too. It's a really nice spot for him. Obviously, you're expecting that offensive line to bounce back. Jonathan Taylor in the backfield, Michael Pittman there, and similar to Jalen Hurts, you got Gardner Minshew to, if Anthony Richardson isn't ready, to potentially take away some of those starts at the beginning portion of the year. So, absolutely love the fit here. I think he can blossom in that system.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is probably where Jalen Carter sees his slide end. And I say slide for the 5th overall pick, but I don't think this stuff is going to be an issue come draft night. It's kind of, creeping its ugly head right now, but I do think Jalen Carter will probably, his floor will at least be, top 6 or so in the NFL draft, because I don't think both Seattle and Detroit would pass on the guy.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. Just uber talent, arguably the best overall player in the class, but with the character concerns, slides a bit to 5 here. If you're a fan of Seattle, I think you have to be absolutely be buzzing at this pick, considering you still have, a top 12 to 15 level quarterback with Geno Smith coming in to replace Russell Wilson. And one of the Wilson picks ends up getting you potentially a generational playmaker on that defense in the interior. So absolutely love Jalen Carter. On the clock back here at the 6th overall pick, Detroit conveyed by the Los Angeles Rams. This is a decision point here because I do think if Carter falls, they could potentially consider him. But ultimately here, given what we know, they did sign 2 corners in free agency with Sutton and with, I believe, Emmanuel Mosley. And they did, of course, bring in CJ Gardner-Johnson. So maybe they're shoring up their secondary so they don't have to take a corner at 6, while it still may be a play at 18. So with that being said, I think get another trench player. Obviously, Dan Campbell, big gritty guy. You got Aiden Hutchinson last year. Get his air on the other side, if you will. Get his compliment. And I do think that Tyree Wilson, given the athleticism, given the size, kind of fits what they want to do down there in Detroit. So give me Tyree Wilson here to the Detroit Lions.
Yeah, I think that pick makes a lot of sense. Tyree Wilson, we've heard, is probably a guy that's going to go higher than people think. I know Daniel Jeremiah floated out the idea that he might even go as high as 3rd overall ahead of Will Anderson. Some teams, prefer him, apparently. I think looking at the Raiders here, they've done a pretty decent job building out a great offense. I think defensive talent is something that's sorely lacking on this team. And I look back at this defensive backfield with, Nate Hobbs had like a decent rookie year last year. You have Amik Robertson, Marcus Epps, Trayvon Merrick. Like, there's not a whole lot of star power in their secondary. And I think Devon Witherspoon, from what I've seen of him, is the type of corner that would, bring some attitude to their secondary. So I like the pick of Witherspoon there. He's got, great ball skills from what I've seen. And I think they could use some turnovers on their defense.
Yeah, no, I like that pick as well. Get an identity on that back end. People might say, oh, what about a guy like Will Levis? I just feel like at this point, we're not really hearing enough attaching the Raiders to Levis. And like you kind of said with Jimmy G, bringing him in 3-year deal. Doesn't really make sense to take a 24-year-old quarterback if you just signed a guy to, $25 million a year it ended up equating to.
Yeah, and you have a coach that's probably fighting for his job here, too. Yeah. And as much as this pick might be decent if Levis works out for the Raiders in the long term, the coach is probably going to be focused on the short-term goals of the team, and he probably has more wiggle room than just simply, being the coach of the team. The GM will draft the players. I think he's going to want a player that can help him win right now. So who are you going with 8th overall here?
Yeah, and typically here, I like getting a defensive lineman to the Falcons because their front is sorely lacking. But there's a lot of buzz right now that they've done a lot of research on this cornerback class. Obviously, can use a cornerback opposite of AJ Terrell. And I think a guy like Christian Gonzalez, tested out of the wazoo, good tape, young player, would fit the billing of a potential top 10 pick. So getting him here at 8th overall, I think would be a great pick if you're a Falcons fan.
Yeah, they're definitely a sneaky Will Levis team just because, Will Levis, we don't exactly know what NFL teams think of him. We talked about this like way back early in the process that, some teams might view him as like the best quarterback in the class. And then CJ Stroud absolutely ripped up the combine. He looks surgical out there. I don't think any teams value Will Levis over CJ Stroud. And if they do, it's got to be a schematic thing. Same goes for Bryce Young. He cracked the weight thresholds that we were looking for. And then Anthony Richardson, we know what he did at the combine. So I think, By elimination, Will Levis's stock is kind of down relative to where it was like a month and a half ago, give or take. So I think maybe it's possible that stock goes back up once we have Kentucky's pro day and he can showcase his arm and stuff like that. But for me, I do think he probably slides a little bit. Maybe Atlanta takes him at 8 overall. They don't really have a long-term solution there at quarterback, but I do think it's possible that they'll pass on him for, a better position player or something like that. So I think Justin Fields went on, pardon my take. He said he wants Jaxon Smith-Njigba. I think they're going to take Jaxon Smith-Njigba. So I'm going to go with JSN here. They could use help all over the place, right? They could use Peter Skoronski. They could use, whatever defensive lineman that you like here at the top of the draft. I think they're going to go with a weapon for their franchise quarterback, the guy that they've shown a lot of belief in. They have DJ Moore now in-house. Darnell Mooney is there, but he's a free agent after this year. And then you have Chase Claypool, who's also a free agent after this year as well. So as much as like DJ Moore, Darnell Mooney, and Chase Claypool seems like a decent receiving core, and maybe you don't want to add to that group, I think Jaxon Smith-Njigba is a better long-term pick because are you going to pay Darnell Mooney and Chase Claypool? Like, I don't know. To me, I think they're probably going to let those guys walk or, re-sign one of them maybe on a 1-year deal after this season.
Yeah, and when it comes to JSN, obviously we know that he could be an absolute number 1 wide receiver in the NFL, but he wouldn't have to be here because you got DJ Moore there. So I do think that's a good pick. And you mentioned it, even though he's in a crowded room in year 1, it's kind of similar to, like, I'll talk about it on Twitter. I'll talk about it amongst people that if a wide receiver that's good enough falls to like Dallas as well, like, you just take the talent. You take a player that can make your quarterback better. And for the Chicago Bears, who want and need Justin Fields to be able to develop, getting him a guy like JSN, who could be an absolute needle mover, I do think would be a great pick. I think, consideration there would be between a guy like JSN or tackle, but getting, Fields the guy that he wants is going to be, more beneficial for you in the long term. So I do think that's a good pick. I'm on the clock here with the Eagles, and obviously you see the jerseys. I don't like picking for this team because they've just done a great job being able to, hold draft equity despite being, one of the top teams in the entire NFL. So it does sting here having to pick for them. But at 10th overall, I think the 2 main players that I'm looking at are Peter Skoronski to potentially play left guard with Isaac Seumalo leaving town, or potentially a guy like Brian Branch to replace that CJ Gardner-Johnson role. So I'm really in between them. I think you can go either way, but I think I'm going to go Skoronski, play him at left guard. People might say, oh, what about Cam Jurgens? They drafted him last year. He's the long-term Jason Kelce replacement, a little too small to play guard. Whereas with Skoronski, obviously a natural tackle over there at Northwestern. You plug him in day 1 left guard. He's a guy that I'm praying falls at some point for the Cowboys. So seeing him go to the Eagles here, I think that would be a fantastic pick. So Howie Roseman, like, just stocking up in the trenches.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is another team that could stock up in the trenches here with this next pick with the Tennessee Titans. I believe they cut bait with Bud Dupree. They don't really have a whole lot going on at offensive tackle or edge rusher. They could use help on either side of the trenches. To me, the edges, I think they would probably favor a guy like Van Ness, who's got a little bit more size as opposed to like a Nolan Smith type, who's very athletic but a little bit undersized. So I think if they went edge, it'd go probably with Van Ness. But I'm going to give them Paris Johnson to give themselves some kind of offensive tackle presence, because they've been kind of had a revolving door at the right tackle spot ever since they whiffed on Isaiah Wilson, sorry. And then Taylor Lewan just recently got cut at left tackle. So I think you just need an influx of talent at that position group. And whether it's Tannehill, whether it's Malik Willis, whether your quarterback of choice is in 2024, which is probably the route that they're going to opt for, you need some protection for them. And I think the blueprint of drafting the tackle 1 year before the quarterback has worked out for teams in the past. And I think that definitely would make some sense here.
Yep. No, I absolutely like that pick. Paris Johnson, very good tackle, big pedigree playing over there at Ohio State. Huge need there with the Titans releasing Luan. So I do think that's a good pick. On the clock here with the Texans, and this is another decision point. You could go with the next receiver, but do teams really value Quentin Johnston as a top 12 pick? Not necessarily sure there. You could go on the defensive line. A guy like Kalijah Kancey absolutely tore up the combine, so that could be a pick. You got Jalen Petrie, so I don't think Brian Branch is in play. You signed Dalton Schultz. You're probably not going to take a tight end. This is a real big decision point here. And ultimately, if I'm looking at it, I'll probably go with a guy like Kalijah Kancey, I think. Just need another interior presence on that defensive line. Again, not a sexy pick, but beefing up the trenches, still being able to develop this team long-term is going to be the goal. So I like getting a guy like Kancey.
Yeah, for sure. I think that kind of makes a lot of sense as to what like the Texans are looking to build right now because they don't really have a ton of star power on their defense. They took
Yep.
Stingley at the top of the draft last year, but up front they're kind of just rolling a rotation up there. So I actually am interested in potentially trading up
Yep.
at this point in time with myself because I'm picking at the Jets pick here. So I don't think personally that the Jets will trade this pick for Aaron Rodgers now that they have an extra second rounder. Right before we recorded this, Elijah Moore was traded to the Cleveland Browns. So now they have pick 42 and 43, and maybe they use both of those picks or, one of those picks plus like a fourth rounder to go after Aaron Rodgers. Eventually, I do think that deal gets done and it doesn't involve pick 13 overall. So to me, I think, and I don't want this to happen. Again, this is a predictive mock. I think if Will Levis was on the board, that Jason Light would make a move to go get him. And the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, they're starting Kyle Trask and Baker Mayfield. And I am all for that because I think our quarterback is in 2024. But if Will Levis starts to slide here a little bit, Jason Light likes big, strong quarterbacks who are smart. And it sounds by all accounts that fits the description of Will Levis. And I know that, they value starting experience as well, which is something that in the fantasy community we don't really care about. But they're going to like the fact that he was like an upperclassman, a little bit more mature. So for me, I think, pick 19, pick 50, and then like a 2 next year. Again, we're paying quarterback taxes here. So we probably have to pay a little bit more than we probably should just to move down or move up 6 picks with the Jets. I think the Jets, they could really monopolize that second round with 42, 43, and 50.
Yeah, not to mention for them, it just equates to more Aaron Rodgers capital. Hypothetically, at some point in this mock, we will figure out exactly what the compensation would look like. But if you're the Jets, you can move down, still get one of your choices at tackle at 19. I think it makes sense for both sides. So we'll make that trade, and then we'll give you guys Will Levis there. A little bit of a slide, but 13th overall, I do think, like you said, Jason Light is going to see the arm talent, is going to see the size, going to say, you know what, let's get this guy into the building.
Yeah, and again, Bucks fans, don't get mad at me. I'm a Bucks fan. I don't want that to happen. This is predictive. I think if Will Levis was on the board there, outside of the top, 12 overall picks, I think Jason Light and a number of other teams potentially could make a move for him as well. Maybe, the Commanders are interested. Maybe, some of the other teams towards the end of the first round might be interested. But yeah, you're on the board here with the New England Patriots. What are you thinking?
Yeah, and I'm looking at it, and I think personally, if the New England saw that Broderick Jones fell to 14, they would run to the podium and they'd go pick him. I think Broderick Jones, you plug him in there. Before the Patriots fans come at me, oh, last time we took a Georgia tackle, Isaiah Wynn, he didn't pan out. No, like you can't think like that. You can't think because somebody from a school didn't pan out in the past that it's not going to pay out in the future. Broderick Jones got the size, got the arm length, got the athleticism to be a day one starter at tackle.
Yeah, I think that's a very Belichickian pick there. And I also think a lot of people mock wide receivers and tight ends to the Green Bay Packers all the time. And I highly, highly doubt they'd actually take a wide receiver or a tight end at 15th overall. They're going to go edge, I think, with their first pick or linebacker, something like that. I think Van Ness kind of fits the mold of the edge rushers they've had there. So I think Van Ness makes a lot of sense. Like, you get a guy that's, 260, 270 pounds. He can play more of like an inside-outside versatility type of role, which is what Preston and Zadarius Smith did for them when they were, I would say their defense was at their best a couple of years ago.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're looking at it right now. Like you kind of said, Preston's a little bit older now. So do you really want to rely upon a guy like that? Rashawn Gary, I believe, still coming back from that major injury that he suffered. So just getting another depth piece, another moldable clay piece, if you will, to rebuild this defense to what you want to see. So I do really like that pick. I think it's such a Green Bay type of pick. On the clock here with Washington, and again, some very, very good pieces. If you're a Washington fan, you're absolutely loving the cornerbacks that are falling to you here. Maybe you go, with another position. Not really anything, jumping off the page for me here. So I do think corner would be where they lean. Joey Porter would make a lot of sense, but Maryland, Washington, I'm going to go with Deonte Banks. A lot of good buzz coming from him. Obviously tested insane at the combine, very good tape from what I'm hearing from a lot of evaluators that I trust. Very, very willing tackler. Just kind of fits the mold of what Washington could be looking to rebuild the identity of that defense. You got the front seven pretty much already set up. Get an absolute playmaker on the back end.
Yeah, makes some sense there. I think that's a very Washington type of pick. Go with a playmaker on the second level there. Pittsburgh's interesting, man. I really don't know what to do with this team. There's a couple obvious connections to make. We got the Pitt receiver with Jordan Addison. You got Joey Porter Jr. I think they would personally go with Joey Porter Jr. They need corners. They lost a couple guys in free agency. They don't tend to invest highly in tackles for whatever reason. They believe in their ability to develop like day 2 and day 3 picks at that position. And I don't know if they've necessarily given up on the offensive linemen that they currently have right now. And I don't see a screaming value on the board at offensive tackle. So I think they'd probably just go with the namesake of a player that was very good for them for a number of years back when Danny and I were kids.
Yeah, no, I think that's a phenomenal pick there. Getting Joey Porter in, you get another identity piece of that defense. Got the arm length, got the size, got the athletic ability. You just plug and play him there, and then obviously, Pittsburgh's the type of team that when there is some connections to them in the past, they usually pay it forward. I mean, we saw it literally last year. Kenny Pickett, Pitt kid, reunited him, kept him in town. Joey Porter, obviously one of the pillars of that defense when they won the Super Bowl back in 08. So getting his son in town, a very phenomenal player that was going to go in this range anyways, just kind of feels like a very good fit for them. But on the clock here at 18 with the Lions, and I wouldn't do this, but with what we're hearing from this tight end class, it feels like these guys are going to go higher than we assume. And if I'm the Lions here, I would just, completely build that defense, completely, attack those resources to build that front. I think they might go with a guy like Dalton Kincaid. And the reason why I'm saying this is if you traded TJ Hawkinson for a 2 last year, like why would you take a tight end? From their perspective, though, it does kind of make sense. You're getting that refreshed rookie deal. You're still getting that player that can play the immediate role of this offense, getting another playmaker for Jared Goff on a team that could potentially, win the AFC or NFC North, win potentially, a top 4 seed in the playoffs. So I wouldn't do this, but I do think Dalton Kincaid would make a ton of sense for them.
Yeah. I think tight ends are going to probably go a little higher. One thing that would be kind of interesting if the Jets were to trade down, that maybe puts tight end in play for them as well, because they don't really have anybody at that position. They just traded away Elijah Moore. Like I said, Garrett Wilson's your only stable pass catcher. I'm probably not going to go in that direction. I'd like to see what the offensive tackle position, if you want to go to that, looks like, because I do think that it's a major need for them. And see, you have, I believe, a right tackle already, correct? I think Darnell Wright is strictly a right tackle, and I think, for the most part, their right tackle position's locked down. Anton Harrison or DeJuan Jones kind of makes some sense here. Let's give him Anton Harrison. You trade down, you get a bunch of day 2 picks. If you want to dress some pass catchers at that point in the draft, you have the picks to be able to do that. You can get wide receivers in the 40s. You can get tight ends in the 40s. And with the 50th pick that you get from the Bucs in this hypothetical trade as well. So I think they'd probably go with a trench type pick. It looks like there's a lot of linebacker needy teams, and there's not a whole lot of linebacker help in this draft class.
Yeah, one of the weaker linebacker classes this year overall. I would say there's some guys on day 2 that you're gonna like, Drew Sanders, maybe a Trenton Simpson, but for the Dion Henley. But for the most part, I do think that given the strength of this class, being on the line, being at cornerback, we're gonna see the more devalued positions kind of show itself out. So looking at the Seahawks here, I'm in between a couple players right now, just kind of wagering exactly what they would do. You could talk about a guy like Jordan Addison, would make a ton of sense playing that role next to DK, next to Tyler Lockett. Obviously, Lockett, an older player, expiring contract within the next couple of years. Long term, you want that wide receiver 2 next to DK. And for a team that's willing to contend, which we see with the Seahawks, just made the playoffs last year, looking at the Niners, quarterback controversy there, if you will, with Purdy dealing with the UCL injury, with Trey Lance not really showing much. I think the Seahawks are going to operate like they're willing to make a push to potentially win now. And if that's the case, adding a guy like Jordan Addison to this offense may not be sexy from a fantasy standpoint, but from a real life perspective, I do think he would be a big game changer on that team.
Yeah, and I think, the Seahawks are kind of like an underrated landing spot for receivers in general, because everybody's a little bit, would be initially scared to draft anybody that goes to the Seahawks as a wide receiver, because you already have Metcalf there, you already have Lockett there, but Lockett is, 30 plus years old at this point in time. I don't think he's going to be there forever. And if they draft Jordan Addison, that probably indicates that Tyler Lockett might be playing his last year there in Seattle. So I think that's a good fit for the type of playmaker they're looking for on offense, for sure, for the Seahawks there. So we're on the board here with the Los Angeles Chargers. I don't really know what to do here, because QJ is already very similar to a receiver that they already have. One receiver that I think the NFL very much likes, that I think I'm going to take here, is Zay Flowers. I think the consensus on Zay Flowers amongst NFL teams might even have him wide receiver 2 or 3 ahead of the consensus fantasy wide receivers, which are JSN, Jordan Addison, and Quentin Johnston. I wouldn't be shocked if Zay Flowers was the 2nd or the 3rd wide receiver off the board ahead of 1 or 2 of those guys. So give me Zay Flowers. He's got inside-out versatility. Keenan Allen's a little long in the tooth. You definitely could put him in the slot the second Keenan Allen's no longer in town. Josh Palmer can play on the outside with Mike Williams for the time being, and Zay Flowers can kind of swap in where he needs to. So I like the fit of Flowers to the Chargers. I think they need some long-term weapons.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great fit there. You get a guy like Zay Flowers in, add some speed to this offense. You already know that Keenan Allen's like a 4.75, maybe even lower at this point. I think he ran a 4.72 at his combine. So you don't really got speed there. And Mike Williams, like, yeah, he's probably like a 4 or 5 guy. You don't have a guy that can really take the top off this defense or off of a defense. And with Zay Flowers, add that speed, low 4.4 type of guy. You can use him in the yak game, could really transcend this offense. So I do think that's a good pick. I also think that if they were on the clock at 21, bringing Kellen Moore in, not really sure exactly what's going to be going on with Austin Eckler, that I think Bijan could make a lot of sense here. But I mean, I think Zay Flowers also, with the speed he brings, would make a ton of sense. So good pick there. I'm on the clock back here with the Ravens. And this is another interesting spot because you don't know what's going to be going on with JK, so you could argue with a guy like Bijan Robinson, but I just think that given the cornerbacks that are at hand here, you could look at that direction. But ultimately, if you're bringing in Todd Monken and you know you're going to throw the football around the yard, add a receiver for Lamar Jackson.
Yeah, makes some sense. I don't love the schematic fit of QJ to the Ravens. It kind of feels like the type of receiver they've gone after, and I think the real type of receiver that they need would have been someone like Jordan Addison or Zay Flowers, who are unfortunately off the board. But I do think you replace like Marquise Brown's role, which was that he was going to take the top off the defense back when he was there. Bateman hopefully can develop into your X receiver or your possession receiver to go along with Mark Andrews, and then a healthy backfield obviously will help out this Ravens offense. Hopefully Lamar Jackson is the architect of this. So I'm going to go with a pick that I have not seen very often. I have almost never seen this fit. And I'm going to take Bijan Robinson to the Minnesota Vikings because, I mean, if you guys are fans of our channel, if you're avid listeners of ours, we have not been very high on Dalvin Cook the last, year and a half in terms of his overall ability. There's rumors that he's on the trade block. I don't necessarily know if he's going to get traded, but draft night could be as good a night as any to move on from Dalvin Cook, 5th round or something like that. Pick for him. You get a stud running back like Bijan Robinson to drop to you at the 23rd pick in the NFL draft. Bijan Robinson is a lot like Dalvin Cook. He can provide value on all 3 downs. He's got excellent vision, perfect fit for the type of scheme that you run there in Minnesota. I think this would be a home run, like 1-for-1 replacement. You get one, running back at the end of his, fantasy football glory, and you get a new running back in who's just going to basically take over the same role that they already had there.
Yeah, no, I think that's a fantastic pick. Bijan Robinson instantly in Minnesota, especially if they move on from Dalvin Cook. You can make the argument that that's the running back 1 overall in fantasy. Given the volume, given the dependency we've seen on them with Dalvin Cook at the goal line, you put Bijan Robinson in that system, I wouldn't be shocked if he's flirting with, 15, 20 touchdowns in year 1.
Yeah, and I mean, just the stud factor alone of one offense, having Justin Jefferson and Bijan Robinson on one team, that's going to make TJ Hawkinson's life easier. KJ Osborne as your, pseudo second receiver for the time being. Maybe they add another day 2 receiver or something like that. Their defense wasn't good last year, and it definitely needs some help. But I do think passing up a top 5 to 10 talent in the draft is not something that they're going to do if they do, see a path where their offense could get much better with a guy like Robinson. So you're on the board here with Jacksonville. Which direction are you going?
Yeah, I just think this player should not be on the board right now, given how good he is. I think if Brian Branch fell at this point, Jacksonville would run to the podium. If he was off the board, I'd consider a guy like maybe Osiris Torrance, Steve Avila, plug in that guard spot, obviously protect Trevor Lawrence. You expect that offense to be the strong point of your team, but Brian Branch is just an absolute stud. I mean, I likened him earlier with Philadelphia. I thought, at 10th overall, he would have made a lot of sense between him and Skoronski. Play that CJ Gardner-Johnson type of role, slot versatility, can play inside the box, willing tackler, tough guy. You add him to this defense, you add some identity, and I mean, you're running away with the AFC South.
Yeah, I mean, I think they're probably already going to run away with the AFC South, but yeah, it definitely helps out their case there on the back end. The Giants, unfortunately, don't find a ton of value here at wide receiver because I do think wide receiver is their biggest need. But we got 4 wideouts already off the board here. So I don't think they would go with, say a Josh Downs or a Jalen Hyatt or somebody like that. I think they already kind of pseudo made their team set up so that they're not pigeonholed into taking a wide receiver at 25, no matter what, with the Darren Waller trade, with re-signing Shepard and with re-signing Slayton. So to me, I think they would probably just take a guy that could give them some explosiveness. And Nolan Smith tested out of his ass at the combine. I think he would probably make a lot of sense for this defense. You got an attacking style defense. You get yourself an athletic freak at edge rusher. I think Nolan Smith would be, I've never really seen this fit, but I do think I kind of like it.
Oh, I love this fit. You're getting a guy that has legitimate elite athleticism. Like we're talking about a guy that could join the NFL and arguably be a top 5 overall athlete on defense right away. And getting that type of talent in New York, you have a good foundation there. Obviously, Wink Martindale loves his explosive edge rushers. We've seen you add him to that team. I mean, he ran what? 245 pounds for a 4.39 official at the combine. That's just absolutely insane. And the game tape backs it up. I mean, we're talking about a guy who knows how to play as a defender at Georgia. Didn't really have the opportunities to line up wide, rush the passer, have all that ease in college. Because in Georgia, there was 10 guys on defense, 11 guys on a defense at a single time that you could isolate. But you add him onto this team, knows how to stop the run, versatility off the edge. I do think 25 would be a very, very good value for Nolan Smith going to the Giants here. I'm on the clock here at 26, and a guy I don't really see mocked to Dallas, but I kind of like the fit now that they got the cornerback need handled. They got the wide receiver need handled. Give a guy like Brian Bryce to Dan Quinn. Let him mold him in that interior of the defense. That defense is already phenomenal as it is. You had a guy like Brian Bryce who can rush the passer from the interior, is an elite athlete for his size, 6'5", 300 pounds, tested out of the wazoo for his size at the combine. You add him here. I do think that would be a home run pick for the Cowboys, and they have the luxury to be able to make that pick because they handled their needs in free agency like good teams do.
Yeah, pretty crazy fit for him. He had, I believe, a down year due to injury or whatever coming off of this year, but he was highly thought of coming out of high school and stuff, and definitely pedigree matters to some degree. So I'm on the board here with Buffalo. The needs don't really line up for Buffalo here. I wouldn't mind, trading out of this pick. If I was, the Bills, I would definitely look for something like that. I think you just plug and play O'Cyrus Torrence. Their interior offensive line is not good, and it hasn't been good for years. Like Josh Allen has covered up quite a bit of issues on that offensive line. They could go with a receiver like a Jalen Hyatt or something like that at this point in time, but I think they'll probably favor the trenches. We haven't really seen the Bills invest highly in skill positions in general. They usually go with the high value positions in the first round, whether it's, offensive linemen, defensive linemen, cornerbacks, whatever the case is. So I think pick 27, they go O'Cyrus Torrence to shore up the offensive line.
Yeah, I love that pick. I think that would be a plug-and-play starter for a team that could absolutely use it. You brought in Damian Harris to add to that power run game with Josh Allen. Getting a guy like O'Cyrus Torrence in town is going to absolutely establish that identity. So like the fit there. I'm on the clock here at 28, and like I kind of said earlier with Kincaid, I do think tight ends are going to go relatively early. You might be thinking, oh, that means Michael Mayer. They need that guy to play that pseudo, Hayden Hurst type of role. I would rather a guy like Darnell Washington. The reason why I would like Darnell Washington if you're Cincinnati is you got T. Higgins on the outside. You got Jamar Chase, Tyler Boyd on the outside. You don't really need that, security blanket style tight end. Adding a guy like Washington that gives you 12P personnel, is a very, very good run blocker, and is one of the best athletes at the entire position as soon as he enters the league, I feel like just fits their offense a lot better. Another red zone threat, 6'6", 265 pounds, 4.6 type of speed, an absolute freak of nature. Adding him at 28, I think would make that Bengals offense nearly unstoppable.
Yeah, I think that would be a great fit for them. And like you said, they don't need a Batman to their passing game. They don't even need a Robin to their passing game. They just need a guy who can contribute. And Darnell Washington, at the very least, can give you, seam busting ability with the athleticism that he has. Your real priority there is getting a guy that's a two-way tight end, and Darnell Washington definitely is. So I think Myles Murphy probably needs to hear his name called here. And I think the Saints are the perfect type of team to develop a guy like Myles Murphy, because he has like the Trey Hendrickson size mold of the, down lineman who can play inside and outside. And I think, Dennis Allen would know how to use a guy like this. So I like Myles Murphy to the Saints there.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great pick there. Plug and play defensive end, adds another identity piece to that defense. Obviously ended up getting this pick as compensation for Sean Payton going to Denver. So I do think that's a good pick for them. On the clock back with the Eagles, you guys already saw earlier in the draft, we would have taken Peter Skoronski for them. So that guard position listed here, not a need anymore. They're an interesting team because obviously they don't have many needs in general. You could look, maybe they get some edge depth. Obviously, Brandon Graham, long in the tooth, brought him back for another year. Don't really know what the long term is there. Josh Sweat, you don't know if he's going to be back next year. They're a team that just kind of feels like they're planning ahead for potential leverage in free agency in the long term. And if that's the case, you're just looking at the best player available. And if that's Will McDonald, makes a ton of sense here. BJ Ojolari, you could go with a guy like Mozzie Smith, though they got Jordan Davis, so that wouldn't really make sense going pure DT. But overall, I mean, out of all the options, I do think that edge would be the play. I think I'm gonna go with Will McDonald. A lot of hype there, athletic player. You plug him in if you're Philadelphia. I think that would be a fine fit. You don't really have to rely upon him year one, but long term, anytime you can get an athletic edge rusher to develop, the Eagles are going to be able to do it.
Yeah, I like the fit there. That makes a lot of sense to me. Kansas City's a weird team to pick for because they could go with like a pass catching running back. Jahmyr Gibbs certainly makes some sense. They could go with a wide receiver. They already have like 38 slot receivers, so I'm probably not going to go with Josh Downs. They could maybe look to get a long-term replacement for Travis Kelce. Michael Mayer certainly makes some sense here as well. Offensive line wise, did they end up replacing Orlando Brown at all? They signed Jawan Taylor, correct?
I believe so. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, theoretically, you don't need to take an offensive lineman with this pick either. So I think what I'm going to do is they're missing some outside wide receiver presence that provides them with some speed. They just lost Mecole Hardman in free agency. Obviously, we know they lost Tyreek Hill last year. I think Jalen Hyatt makes a ton of sense for the Kansas City Chiefs here. You get yourself somebody who can play purely on the outside, along with, probably Kadarius Toney. I don't even know exactly what they plan to do at wide receiver, but I think Jalen Hyatt is the type of guy that can anchor their, deep threat game, take advantage of Mahomes' big arm.
Yeah, I think that's a great pick there. It gives you leverage against MVS. Obviously, they signed him to the contract last year. Believe it's pretty easy to get out of that deal after this year. So if this year you have MVS, Jalen Hyatt obviously plays that role and a ton more with what MVS does with stretching the field. I think that'd be a really good fit and a player that Mahomes can absolutely unlock in that offense from a fantasy standpoint.
Yeah, absolutely. So you guys can see the draft there on the screen. Number 1 overall, CJ Stroud. Bryce Young, number 2 overall, Will Anderson goes 3 to the Arizona Cardinals. Anthony Richardson, 4 to the Indianapolis Colts. Jalen Carter, 5th overall to the Seattle Seahawks. Overall, you guys can see the draft. I'm sure, some people disagree with the picks that we made. Again, we are fantasy football analysts. We don't know a ton about the NFL draft. So if, whatever defensive or offensive lineman we took for you that doesn't fit your scheme or whatever the case is, I don't shoot the messengers out here. We're just having fun with this mock draft. Not a lot of tight ends off the board here. I think, 2 tight ends in the first round is definitely a lot, but given the strength of this draft class, I wouldn't be shocked if we saw 3 or 4 of these dudes go in the first round. A number of names still left on the board that would make some sense, like you said, with some of the dudes there. So thoughts on the mock? What do you like for your Cow? I hate this for the Buccaneers. So if you guys think I screwed your team, I screwed my own team way harder by taking a quarterback that I do not believe in whatsoever, but I think Jason Light will.
Yeah, no, and when it comes to the Cowboys here, I like the fit with Brian Brzee, add some interior rush. Obviously, if you're a film guy and you don't like Brzee, tell me why in the comments. I'm always down to learn more. But from what I'm hearing, you're just getting an athletic, ball of clay, if you will, for a guy in Dan Quinn who's well known at being able to develop defensive line talent. So I absolutely would love that, especially because we covered the cornerback and wide receiver holes early in free agency through the trades with Brandon Cooks and Stephon Gilmore.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. So if you're new to the channel, leave a subscribe down below, hit the noti bell as well. Hit the like button if you guys enjoyed, hit the dislike button if you hate who we picked for your team, which I know will usually happen with some of these mock drafts. And again, if you're new to the channel, go check out some of the fantasy content. If you play Dynasty fantasy football, we got tons of that stuff over here. Check out the Tail of the Tape series if you guys want to know more about these prospects. CJ Stroud dropped yesterday. Bryce Young last week, Anthony Richardson last week, and Bijan Robinson a couple weeks ago. So definitely check out all that stuff. If you guys want, more insight to our fantasy football rankings, you can check out flockfantasy.com and use the promo code FSE for 30% off any of the packages. You can try 2 days totally for free to see all the value available on the site from us, from Mason over at the Fantasy Flock, from Fantasy Endgame, Chris and Pierre over there, and from Zach and Badake over at Fantasyland and Dynastyland Fantasy Football. We've teamed up with those guys to bring you guys one product, one subscription that you guys can get all of our extra content, our bonus content from. It's the best deal out there on fantasy football YouTube right now. Like I said, promo code FSE at flockfantasy.com. So with that being said, peace out, and we'll talk to you soon.